The Team House with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 377 of The Team House. I'm Jack Murphy, here with our guest today, Frank Larkin. Frank served in many different capacities: Navy SEAL, paramedic, police officer, Secret Service, worked presidential protection details, financial crimes. You were the sergeant at arms at the Senate.
I was.
And you're also the father of a Navy SEAL, Ryan Larkin, who struggled with traumatic brain injury. And you've been a big advocate for helping soldiers who are afflicted with this, something we'll get into in depth, I hope.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me on. And, to your listening and viewing audience, glad to be here and talk about some of these issues that are certainly affecting our active duty and veteran populations.
So I'm going to take you back in time. Tell us a little bit about sort of like your origin story. Like, where did you grow up and how did that sort of take you towards governmental service?
I grew up in the Philadelphia area, went to high school there, pretty, routine, family environment, had 5 brothers and sisters, went to public school. I started working pretty much at an early age, delivering newspapers, around the community at about 11, 12 years old, and then mowing lawns, and then on to my first, paycheck job was working in a grocery store, for a local chain supermarket, and I also volunteered as on the local ambulance squad, which kind of started whetting my appetite for emergency medicine, and from there, graduated from high school and enlisted in the Navy.
Mm-hmm. What year was that?
That was 1973 when I entered the Navy, and right after graduating high school.
And so what was it like going through BUD? So this is right after Vietnam, actually.
Yeah, so it really was, there was the exodus was going on. There was a lot of refugees that were being evacuated to the United States. I got involved in some of that. My assignment before going down to training, SEAL training, was Camp Pendleton, where they were taking refugees in and had a number of refugee camps there that, they were trying to house, a lot of these folks that have been displaced. Quite a sight. And then, once I was able to get to the teams following training, dealing with a lot of the guys that had come, out of Vietnam, and certainly their experience there, a number of them who, were manifesting the invisible wounds that we kind of see today in our GWAT operators.
I'd be interested to do a little bit of even though it's anecdotal, cross comparison, what were you seeing in some of those guys that had served in Vietnam, and did those symptoms resonate with you down the line?
Yeah, at first, you just assumed that they had been through a lot. Mm-hmm. They were proud of their time in Vietnam, and certainly some of the accomplishments that they had. It was a new mission for the SEAL teams, and again, the predecessor UDT teams, to operate in a riverine, more of an inland environment. There certainly was enough work to go around for everybody, considering all the special operations groups. Their focus was more of a direct action as opposed to SF that mm-hmm. was, trying to get in to help the indigenous population deal with the threat. But they came back. A number of them, had some visible wounds, from enemy contact, while others, wrestled with, not being able to sleep. I believe a lot of moral pain, emotional pain, whether they would openly admit it or not, but certainly I think the signs were there that they were wrestling with something because of the alcohol was the go-to. A lot of heavy drinking, guys kind of falling off the grid for weeks, months at a time. A lot of fights where, pent-up energy, whether it was, in a bar, whether it was at home with a spouse, but you could see the struggle that a number of these guys were weighted down with, and really not a lot of answers at the time as to what might be going on. And very often, I would say back then, the difference is that, they kind of, the system kind of dealt with it, absent somebody doing something egregious, a crime or some type of a serious act of violence. The teams tried to, the best way they could, take care and shepherd.
Keep them around.
And keep them around, not kick them to the curb, not, demean them, not, hang labels on them, but, work with them. And sometimes it was a challenge. It would ebb and flow. Guys would, kind of get back up on step, and then the next thing you know, they're down again. So it was an interesting time.
Beyond just that, I mean, some of the folks you were working with at the time, what was it like being a SEAL in 1973? Like, I remember I talked to a guy who served around that time frame, and he's like, man, back in those days, we had a snorkel, fins, K-bar knife. That was about it.
Yeah, it was pretty Spartan back then.
Yeah.
I joke, it was back before we got outboard motors. Outboard motors were invented. And the reason I say that is because I then compared it to my son. Mm-hmm. And the kit that he had, it was night and day difference.
Yeah.
Just the technical advances, the quality of the gear. But back then we did what we could. We made the most out of what we had. At the end of Vietnam, special operations was not very well supported by the military enterprise. In some cases, they very much were looked down on, and so we didn't get the care and feeding that a lot of the other traditional service components got. If you were big hull Navy or aviation or infantry or one of the conventional components of the services, special operations was not well regarded, and I think a lot of that was because it wasn't well understood, and when I think the system doesn't understand something, they tend to fear it. They tend to create narratives that kind of ensure that comfort zone about how to deal with groups that are non-traditional.
These ruffians,
those rogues, those outlaws.
It was also a time when the Army or the military in general was trying to put the Vietnam experience behind them, and in their minds, the future was mechanized warfare, tanks across Europe, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was a big order of battle.
Yeah,
that's what they were thinking. A doctrinal war, and so when you get into an asymmetric, irregular war environment, as you need flexibility, adaptability. You need people that can make decisions on the edge, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But that is a fundamental distinguishing discriminator for our military compared to a lot of other militaries around the world.
Oh yeah.
The thinking warrior brain that can overcome, they can act, they can decide, they can make a difference right to the tip of the spear, and that has proven invaluable so many times in our military history, in the conflicts that we've had in the past as a nation. So that's an important point that I'll elaborate on a little bit later.
And so how long were you in the teams for?
About 8 years.
Any notable deployments or anything you'd like to mention before we go on?
No, about that time, Demo Dick Marcinko was the CO of Team 2. Quite a character. I liked working for him. I mean, it was one of those dynamics that
you loved him or hated him.
Yeah, either. That's right. He definitely was out on the edge, and I understand that there were some issues that I really did not have any contact with, so I really can't speak. But from what I saw, he was all about his operators and doing what he could do to make sure that they had the best equipment and certainly, the best missions. I think that back in that time, Europe was dealing with the Red Army faction, the Red Brigade. You had a number of high-profile kidnappings that were going on. So you could see some of this terrorist, extremist, kind of percolations
Right.
that were starting to come to the surface. Not well understood. Was it a military responsibility? Was it a law enforcement responsibility, or a combination thereof? Also, we had some activity down in Central America with the Cubans, particularly around the Panama Canal, and again, that as a strategic, cut through, both North and South America. Not sure what they were up to at the time, but it was a level of concern that maybe they would try to impact the operations of the canal. Not so much drugs back then were at the top of the list, and then certainly you had some other activities going on in the Middle East that weren't as high profile as they are now, but definitely you could see that there was some instability that was starting to brew.
And so you spend a lot of time in Central America and like Lebanon, those areas?
No, pretty much Europe,
Okay.
and then really kind of Central America for the most part at the time. Did not have any Asia deployments, so it was. But the training was constant. I mean, always. I think that they were at a period post Vietnam as to, okay, what are we going to be? What are we going to do? And this was in an environment where you had big Navy, the Pentagon and so forth, not really sure about how to use their special operations forces. And again, everybody was licking their wounds. The budgets has been cut.
Mm-hmm.
So, we were putting together Jeeps and other vehicles by taking parts off the gunnery ranges. We would go out there and kind of strip out vehicles and build new vehicles, by virtue of the fact that we weren't getting any new vehicles. So it was kind of an interesting time.
Correct me if my memory's misfiring. The SEALs have like a semi-permanent thing going on in Crete at the time?
Yes, they did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and that was kind of at the tail end of that. But, to talk to the guys that had been to Crete, in that assignment, they loved it.
I bet.
It was a garden spot in the
Diving
Mediterranean.
Yeah. Okay, so what led to your decision to sort of leave the SEAL teams or leave the Navy after 8 years and go and try something else?
Basically, go to school.
Okay.
I had the intention of going to school and then flipping back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I had gotten, bitten, while an undergraduate by the law enforcement bug. I met a cute nurse in the emergency department, one of the hospitals that I would transport patients to as a paramedic. I worked as a paramedic on a hospital-based unit, in the Philadelphia area. So one thing led to another, and I kind of vectored towards law enforcement. And I didn't have any regrets about not coming back into the teams because I had other experiences in other directions
Sure.
that, proved to be, challenging. So, but yet I also still had that tug going on of, what would have been like if I had come back in, especially at the doorstep of, the creation of Dev Group,
Right.
and some of the special activities that were coming about at that time.
So what was your first job as a cop?
I was a beat cop in the Philadelphia area, walking, all this.
1980.
Yeah,
Must have been fun.
yeah, it was. A white cop and predominantly black, neighborhoods. They hadn't had a beat cop in a long, long time. So it was an experience, coming out of the the teams, with the training that you get there and the experience, you would think, oh yeah, I've got everything I need to survive. And I found out pretty quick that unless I figured it out, I was going to go home lumped up, every night, and with a lot of visible bruises and wounds to remind me that I still had a long way to go.
Clean drinking water is one of the best investments you can make for your family's health. That's exactly why I started using Cove Pure, a countertop water purifier that filters out all the things you don't want in your water so you can feel good about what your family's drinking. Here's something you might not realize. When people take meds, their bodies don't absorb all of them. Much of that stuff gets flushed down the toilet. The water treatment plants are horrible at filtering out those leftover pharmaceuticals. Things like antibiotics, antidepressants, and even hormone disruptors from birth control pills. It's no wonder our society is so messed up. Luckily, Cove Pure is lab certified to remove up to 99.9% of impurities. That includes fluoride, PFAs, agricultural runoff, and of course, pharmaceutical drugs. The first thing I noticed with Cove Pure is the taste. Guys, this is what water is supposed to taste like. Pure, clean, no aftertaste. You'll actually want to drink more. And Cove Pure makes it so easy. It sits on top of your countertop, no plumbers, no drilling. You just fill it up and plug it in. You can even select whatever temperature you want, hot, cold, or warm, with the tap of a button. You wouldn't take a stranger's drug prescription, so why accept their leftovers in your water? Protect yourself with the link below, covepure.com/team, right now. And for a limited time, you'll get a special discount of $200 off from your Cove Pure purifier. That's covepure.com/TEAM. What were some of those changes in approach that you had to make as you became a law enforcement officer?
You kind of go in with a mindset, hey, you're looking for crime, it's locking people up. Trying to, but really what I found is it's just trying to be, a good person within those neighborhoods to see how you can, a lot of these folks were just really good people. I mean, they didn't have a lot of money, on the socioeconomic scale, they were kind of at the lower end, but it did not, in no way did it mean that they didn't have pride.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I tried the lessons I learned, 3 basic points that I try to pass on to new officers and public servants is one that, something all our mothers told us, treat people the way you want to be treated. But you got to ask that question in reverse. How do you think they want to be treated? And sometimes we fail to ask that question. We look at it through our lens, but we don't pick up their lens and look back at the same thing. The second is treat everybody with respect, no matter where they come from. Everybody has got a different story, has got a different route to how they got to where they are, but treat them with respect. Third thing is never take their dignity away. You do that, you got a fight on your hands. And so those 3 principles, those 3 legs of a stool that have served me well, through life. But that experience walking the beat was formidable. Just something as simple as you see an elderly woman struggling with bags, walking up the sidewalk, just going up and picking up those bags, even though she's protesting, no, I can do it. It's just, and walking her home or getting a bike for a kid that doesn't have one. We certainly had collected a lot of bikes, in the department that had been abandoned or recovered. And, so to be able to take one of those and get it to a kid that didn't have one so that he could be part of, a group of other kids that had bikes, somebody that maybe had a little too much to drink, instead of locking them up, just, how can we get them someplace where they're going to be safe until they sleep it off. Things like that that start to build trust and relationships with the community that ultimately, can watch your back as you're also doing your job of, enforcing the laws and protecting them.
And I imagine when you have that kind of relationship with the community, that when something bad does happen, we're looking for this rapist, this murderer, the community will be like, yeah, that guy right there, go get him.
Yeah, and they had their own code. I mean, I can remember eventually I went and worked homicide, and we'd have somebody, that would be shot broad daylight, middle of the street, a body, everybody could see it. No doubt that somebody, had to see something, and nobody would talk. And you scour the block, you try to find that person that could give you some information. Nobody's talking. And then maybe 2 weeks later, same block, again another homicide, but this time they're not only shot but they're stabbed, set on fire or whatever, and you can't stop people from talking. And you just wonder what's the difference. And so within their code, within their kind of moral baseline or whatever, it's one thing if somebody gets shot over a dispute. It's another thing when someone gets absolutely abused and, shot, stabbed, burned.
Desecrate the body and all that.
Yeah, that's over the top. That's something that crossed their red line. So if that makes sense, and that's something that, I mean, I got to tell you, as a gringo, operating in neighborhoods like that, that's something I had to learn. But I grew to respect it, and it all, just like anything, it comes down to relationships. And I met some wonderful people that, while I was in the area, I had stayed in contact with, and I just, a lot of respect for them.
And I think maybe around this time, because I imagine your son Ryan would be about my age. Was he born while you were working for the Metro Police Department?
No.
Oh, he's a little later?
Yeah, a little bit later.
Okay.
We didn't have kids until we were about 30, almost 30. So it wasn't until I was in federal service,
Okay.
with the Secret Service, that we started our family.
How did you make the jump from beat cop to Secret Service?
It was pretty interesting. I applied to both the Bureau and the Secret Service at the same time. I had a good buddy that was also a detective. We decided, well, let's take the test, see where it goes. I wanted a little bit more of a challenge. It's kind of been a theme of my life. I always want to kind of experience new things. So Secret Service called first, wound up taking their test, scored very well on it. And then eventually the Bureau called, but I gravitated towards the Secret Service because it was smaller than the Bureau. It had a pretty unique mission, no-fail mission, and it was, to me, had more of a special operations feel than the Bureau did. And then my buddy, he wound up going to the Bureau, and the two of us would eventually come together years later down in Waco, Texas. He was a member of HRT, the hostage rescue team, and as an agent paramedic, I was, along with a number of other agent paramedics, brought in to assist the Bureau.
Gotcha.
With fortifying their emergency medical response. It was a large operation, and they had limited resources, but we had a very close relationship.
And so what year did you get to the Secret Service?
84.
Okay. So you go through all the training. What you did, how many presidential protection details do you think you've done?
So I started when Reagan was in office, not on the permanent detail, but but during his time, all the way up through Bush 43.
And I mean that we've had at least one Secret Service guy on this show who's during the George W. Bush Obama years. He had some great stories. I mean, like, do you have any stories about like traveling overseas with the Secret Service protecting the president, like everything that has to go into making that happen?
Well, we call it the show. I mean, it's quite an operation. You're depending on where you're going and what kind of threat vectors need to be considered, really dictate the loadout that you're going to take on a trip like that. They send in an advance team to deal with the host countries in order to, develop the visit. And you're working with the White House staff. You're also working, because it's foreign, you're working with the Department of State, and then you're working with the host government, which could be a challenge. Sometimes it gets to be a little bit of a, chest bumping exercise. We go in with certain expectations that the host country may not, line up on those expectations. But the bottom line is had the ultimate responsibility of protecting the most powerful leader in the world. So, we take our full up kit with us. We don't rely on their vehicles or their, limousines. We fly everything to the site of the visit to include all the support entities that come in order to ensure that protective environment. So it's quite an operation. It's, we have a saying that, it's all about attention to detail. And, you only got one chance to get it right. There's no do-overs. So some of the venues that we would go to that were, pretty hostile, we had bad intelligence. We would go in and work quite closely with the agency in addition to the State Department. We'd also rely heavily on our trusted allies to feed us information on potential threats. And then we would have, the visible presence, protective presence, and then we would have the invisible, what we call our quick response or our backup. And very often that would be our own military special operations forces or agency elements that would be in a ready response position to come in the event that, we dealt with an assault or some type of crisis that we needed to get out of a place very quickly.
Ever have any kind of sketchy close calls happen on one of those trips?
Absolutely. I mean, at times it really came down to a decision of breaking off a motorcade route because of threat intelligence, reports of explosives underneath a bridge, an unresolved, threat that they had not been able to run down, that at the last minute would change the direction of that visit. We've had situations where, things have been thrown at events. I think it was Tbilisi. We had a couple hand grenades that were thrown. While
the president was like speaking?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it was, fortunately it went low water. And, but every time something like that happens, in a foreign venue, you try to have a level of control and protective umbrella that, we would expect here domestically. But the reality is that we don't control all that environment.
Right.
So sometimes there are vulnerabilities that are created because host governments drop the ball or don't come through on things that they promise to come through on, and that's where having that situational awareness and being able to close those gaps quickly or to mitigate a vulnerability is really what makes the difference sometimes with a disaster versus a successful visit.
I mean, you guys have your work cut out for you. Like, I think, especially, didn't Biden visit Ukraine during the war? I mean, like trips that, You have to worry about a foreign country attacking the president. You have to worry about a terrorist organization attacking the president, or just some lunatic pulling out a pistol in the crowd and shooting at him. I mean, just the amount of potential threats you have to guard against is kind of off the wall.
Yeah, and most of the public generally doesn't hear about them. They're kept pretty much on the lowdown. That's getting harder and harder these days because there's so many leaks that are coming out. But back in my day, we were pretty successful. We were very dependent on working with the interagencies. The Secret Service can't do it all alone. For instance, coming up to a place like New York, there's no way the Secret Service has the organic resources within the agency to protect the president or even the UN activities, General Assembly, and other high-profile activities without the support of NYPD, the Bureau, other agencies that, again, are all part of that collective effort. And it really comes back to relationships, and you don't want to build a relationship in the heat of the crisis. You want to kind of, you want to go out, you want to break bread with these guys and gals ahead of time. You want to understand each other's capabilities and have that level of trust that when you pick up the phone or you call on the radio, that they're going to be there.
And after doing the presidential protection details, you went into financial crimes?
So the Secret Service is a multimodal responsibilities. It is responsible for protecting the financial infrastructure of our nation, which involves everything from hard currency, which is the old counterfeit days. Especially with younger generations, we're getting less and less in our carrying of hard cash. Most of it's either plastic or electronic transfer. So the services had to adapt to all that, and then now you're talking about the digital financing or Bitcoin and other platforms that facilitate the movement of wealth or value. All are kind of interconnected, and one of the reasons that the service has always tried to hold on to that is because it has a tremendous relationship to other things. It's not only about the financial stability of our nation, but nothing is free. So if you follow the money, you get a whole different perspective on X. Whether it's a crime organization, whether it's terrorist threat financing, whether it's another country's activities, and especially here in New York City, you have it's such a major intersection for the movement of financial wealth. So the Secret Service has that responsibility, and then you have the out front, high publicity, responsibilities around protection of the president, the vice president, foreign leaders, and other folks that are designated. And then there's a protective intelligence responsibility that goes along with all that. So, and that's kind of a unique,
like a counterintelligence kind of thing.
Both counterintelligence and protective intelligence, where you're interacting with your interagency partners, with foreign governments, in order to maintain a level of situational awareness of threats that may be potentially affecting the president, the office of the presidency, the vice presidency, others, to include the Congress in many cases. That again, the Secret Service takes very seriously. And I remember being sent out on protective intelligence cases because someone's made a threat, or they've got a group that has showed some negative interest or threatening interest in a maybe a visit or some type of movement, and essentially was, don't come home until you have it on a hook. It was, you would run this thing to the ground no matter how long it would take, and with just whatever resources you needed. I mean, they took it very, very seriously. So I know the service has been through some tough times recently. I'm sure there's a variety of different explanations for that. But the bottom line is that, they have a no-fail mission, and, things have changed over the years, but they have a no-fail mission. You don't get a second chance.
If you're in the market for a new mattress, you've probably seen all the brands out there vying for your attention. Big names, splashy ads, all promising the same thing. But here's the only brand that does it right. It's GhostBed. GhostBed was created and is still run by manufacturing experts with more than 20 years of mattress making experience. They know the craft, and they know how to build a bed that actually lasts. So how do they offer premium mattresses for up to 50% off less than the competition? It's not hype, it's smart logistics. As a family-owned company, that means there's no board of investors to answer to. It's just folks working hard, selling mattresses. These are the true manufacturing pros, and the result is an exceptional cooling and comfort at a price that won't keep you up at night. Every GhostBed mattress includes proven cooling materials backed by a 20 to 25 year warranty. You also get a 101 night sleep trial with free returns if the mattress doesn't work for you, and fast free shipping. Most orders arrive in 2 to 5 days. Right now, as a Team House listener, you can get 25% off site-wide for a limited time. You can just go to ghostbed.com/house and use the promo code HOUSE at checkout. That's ghostbed.com/house, promo code HOUSE. Upgrade your sleep with GhostBed, the makers of the coolest beds in the world. Some exclusions apply. See site for details. I want to thank GhostBed so much for continuously supporting us. It's been going on a year almost, so I really appreciate that. I hope you guys, if you're in the market for mattresses or pillows or bedding, check out GhostBed. You can go to ghostbed.com/house and get 25% off right now. Love you and love GhostBed. Thanks, guys.
And I almost hate to ask you this, but I feel like I have to. When I read in the biographical information you sent me that you were at the World Trade Center on 9/11 with the Secret Service. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I was a supervisor, and at the time I was running the financial crime squad, and I was also in charge of the training for the office, and so had a fairly sizable cadre of agents, everything from brand new boot agents up to seasoned agents. We were the biggest office in the Secret Service. A lot of responsibilities here in New York. You get a lot of foreign heads of state coming in. Certainly, you have the UN. It's the financial center. So, again, a lot of activity. So, in addition to our criminal investigative responsibilities, a lot of protection, and certainly with that, protective intelligence and some of the other, threads that go along with that. On 9/11, it's almost 25 years. It's hard to believe.
Yeah, it is.
I had a routine. I would literally get up at 5 a.m. and leave the house. The whole goal was try to get through the Holland Tunnel by 6 o'clock. If you didn't get through by 6 o'clock, you were screwed. I mean, it was almost like, a man-eating flower that would just close up, and you would be stuck. And there's no predictability of how fast you would move. But I would get in before 6 o'clock in the morning into the office, and then I was a big runner. I would run along the West Side Highway, along the Hudson, and I remember that day I was coming back from my run, looking at the two towers. It was a beautiful day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. It just a crystal blue background, backdrop on the two towers. And I just remembered saying and thinking, and I don't know why, but I said, we're just so lucky that here in the city and in the World Trade Center that we haven't had anything major occur. I had been at the on site at the first attack in '93. I was down in Washington. I came up within hours of that attack, which almost brought down, Tower 1 when that car bomb went off in the basement. We had a number of agents that were injured. It was a very close call for the World Trade Center at the time. And then, here we are in 2001. I get back off my run. I'm in the shower, And I'm coming out of the shower, and we got a bunch of sinks, outside the showers. And, Secret Service agents being Secret Service agents, they're using hair dryers to, kind of dry their hair after their workout. And I always would say to them, hey, you guys are going to, watch out. You're going to light yourselves up, with all that water and those hair dryers. And just then the light started to flicker. And within seconds, somebody came across the PA. Hey, there's been a massive explosion at Tower 1. And then maybe a minute or two later, they came back and they said, this is there's been an actual explosion at Tower 1. Evacuate the building immediately. All personnel evacuate the building immediately.
You were in Tower 7, right?
Yeah, we were in Tower
Okay.
7. We had a number of other agencies and so forth in Tower 7, to include the Mayor's Emergency Command Post. That was a 49-story tower or high-rise, the newest one in the complex. And I remember going back to my locker, and everybody's running out, and they're, all sorts of attire, everything from, boxer shorts to, just half dressed to fully dressed. And I remember going back to my locker, and I just, I put my stuff back on. I was wearing a suit that day. I was supposed to go to the UN. I was a supervisor up there for the UN General Assembly. We had a bunch of meetings. So I put, all my stuff on, took my time. Meanwhile, I'm like the last one in the locker room, and I go down to my office, which is a floor below, and I run into the agent in charge, and he says, hey, I'm relocating everybody out to a park that was alongside the Hudson River to try to kind of reconstitute the office and get some accountability. I said, okay, fine. I said, because of my background, having, been involved in law enforcement and, from the emergency medical side and so forth, I said, well, look, I'll go down and liaison with Police and Fire Command, and then I'll pass on to you whatever, I hear from that. He says, hey, good, 2 thumbs up. So I went into my office, got every piece of communications that I could get, our Secret Service radio. I got flip phone back then. There's 2 little digital 2-way pagers, which actually proved to be the most valuable piece of communications that day.
That worked.
That worked. That was the only thing that worked.
Because the cell lines were like jammed up.
Yeah, they all kind of shit the bed. And then I had an NYPD radio, because we worked so closely with NYPD. We had their radios too. And I remember going to the emergency stairwell, and I opened up the door, and it was just clogged with people, and they were just like, their eyes were like this. And so I said, shit, I'm not getting in the middle of that. So I went to the elevators, which they tell you is the last thing you should do. And I pushed the down button, and the door opened up, nobody's on it, hit the, G for ground, took me all the way down, opened up, and I was on the ground floor. But then I walked out into a lobby of hundreds of people. And as I'm walking out to try to get out of the building, I could hear them screaming, and I couldn't understand why. And but periodically they would just let out these blood-curdling screams. And I'm trying to, I'm not outside, so I can't see what's going on. And I step outside, and I go across the street towards Tower 1. And I'm looking up, and it's just boiling fire at this point. We're starting to get some emergency equipment to arrive on the scene. A lot of our agents who are medically trained, at least at the first responder level, a few at the EMT level, and I think I was the only paramedic trained individual. But as I'm walking towards Tower 1, something caught my eye, and I stopped, and just then this just unnerving thud right in front of me, and it was somebody that had jumped from the upper floors. And literally, if I had not stopped and turned, I would have been crushed. A number of people have been crushed that day, or killed or seriously injured from folks that unfortunately had, made that ultimate decision to how can you explain that?
Yeah, you can't. I mean, that's why it shocked the whole country, because no one could.
And it was as you know, when I finally did look up, it was almost like as if the sky was raining people. I mean, that it's a sight that will never leave me, and I can't imagine those folks in that position making that final decision, and it was a final decision. Because everybody came to work that day, there was no warning.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a beautiful day. How could this happen? And everything is going to shit like instantly. And every time you turned right or left, something was changing. I mean, you could, even the police and fire command were struggling to try to get a handle. I mean, this was just an unprecedented event. And I remember at that point rallying up with the mayor was there, the police commissioner, fire commissioner. We were on the street when the second plane hit, and it hit on the opposite side of Tower 2, and it was like a shotgun blast coming at us. I mean, Volkswagen-sized chunks of, what plane Tower 2 were coming at us, and all I can remember is yelling, get cover, and next thing you know, that the stuff is just raining down all around us, and as things kind of settled out, I stood up and I'm laying on top of a guy, and he's a sizable guy, and he's face down, and so I just like your adrenaline's going. I just picked him up, and he turns to me and he says, hey, for a little guy, you're pretty powerful, and it was Bernie Carrick, who was the police commissioner. Yeah. So he was a character too. I mean, I know he hit some speed bumps, but he was a street guy. He wasn't afraid to make a decision. But it was interesting. I was also able to facilitate a phone call down to the White House, which I think the mayor eventually was able to get on that line to talk to somebody at the other end about what was going on. A payphone back then, payphones were for your listeners or for people that we used to have these phones that were on poles, or we put quarters into to make phone calls. But it really came down to that, and at that point, before the second plane hit, it's kind of hard to believe, but we were still trying to figure out what happened to Tower 1.
Yeah,
now, some people had a better sense or at least seen the plane fly in, but I can tell you in those early minutes, there was, because things always happen in New York. I mean, New York has a lot of stuff that always goes on, and high profile events or incidents. So we were just wondering, hey, is this a gas explosion? Is this what's going on up here? And then when the second plane hit, there was no doubt that we were under attack. And following that, I took a crew of guys. After the second plane hit, the police and fire command kind of split operations, and I went with the police side, which was going up near Vesey and Church Street. Up by the old church.
Yep.
And as they were kind of forming up there, it was, the challenge was, as far as command and control, it was really still trying to understand the scale of what's going on, and you have multiple things happening at the same time, and as you're going through that whole sifting process. And you've got resources coming in, all of a sudden you start hearing this very unnatural rumbling, and people yelling, take cover, take cover. I could not see the top of the two buildings. because all the smoke and the debris were blowing over the top of us. We were on the leeward side.
The old church, you're like a little south of the World Trade Center.
Yeah. South and east.
Yeah.
So I think it was next to the Millennium Hotel. That used to be kind of a...
Before my time.
Yeah. I don't think it's called that anymore. But it's... I remember diving under a fire truck, and all of a sudden the ground just started to vibrate, and all of a sudden everything went black, to the point where I had to stuff my face into my suit jacket and just to breathe. And remember crawling out over a body, and it turned out to be a guy who I just talked to right before all that.
He got killed by debris.
Yeah, well, debris or a heart attack. He was an elderly gentleman carrying a suitcase, well dressed, looked like a Wall Streeter or somebody, coming from that financial sector, and it just took a number of minutes where that debris started to settle down, where you could start making out shapes, and there were fires that were starting on the ground from the jet fuel. At that point, I didn't realize the buildings had come down. I thought maybe there had been a partial collapse.
Right.
Anything that was later than air was kind of, pushed out. And then with the jet fuel subsequently caught on fire, we had vehicles that were on fire on the street. And then my biggest worry at that point was, where are my people? I had a handful of people that were with me, all just great agents. About everybody was focused on the same thing. How can we get in and help, the injured get out? How can we, be of value in this crisis that, again, we're still trying to figure out what's going on. You could hear jets flying over, fighter jets. Again, not sure whether something else is coming at us. We didn't know if they were ours or it was a very confusing, chaotic time, to the point where you had no communications, and the only thing that you could affect was literally what was in your visual range, what you could yell to somebody, what you could physically go and touch, see. That was your area of control. And eventually reconstituted our guys. We started grabbing equipment off of some of the police emergency services and fire equipment that were there, when all of a sudden somebody said, hey, run for cover, Tower 1. And all I remember was looking up at Tower 1. By then, some of this smoke and the cloud, basically the smoke had cleared. I could see the antenna up on Tower 1, and as I was looking at it, I could start seeing it starting to lean. And then, someone yelled, hey, run, get cover. I remember going around the corner of the post office building and hunkering down. The same thing happened. Everything went black, terrible rumble, and just this force of energy that hit us. And then once again, like the first time, once that settled out, there were more fires, because now there was more debris that had been pushed out. Still didn't know that both towers had come down. And we had, there was a circle of fire that literally, from where we were, that kind of, enveloped that area of the World Trade Center complex. And we could see that there were people trying to get out from within, and they looked like zombies.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw the pictures, they're all, dusted up, and literally they were just in a catatonic state. And so there was an old fire truck that was hooked up to a hydrant right on the corner of Church, I think in VZ, where the old church is. And there was fires that had started in some of the storefronts of the buildings there on the corner. There was fire that was getting close to the church. And I remember myself and another agent who had some basic fire training. We got, to this pump panel on this fire truck, and we figured out how to get the water flowing. We kicked the pump in. It had a big deluge gun on top of the fire truck, and then we stretched some hoses with some nozzles, and a number of the guys, went forward and started attacking the wall of flames. And it was interesting because the fire, as these cars, as this paper and so forth caught on fire, it then, worked its way underneath vehicles that then exploded the gas tanks. And that then led to, fiery rivers of gasoline moving down the street, lighting off other cars and trucks. And, you got burning tires. I mean, it was quite a sight. And there was no firemen around. Later to find out why.
Yeah.
We got water. We started, knocking some of this fire down to get some of these people ushered out. I can remember I was up on top of this, the engine, working the deluge gun and pointing it towards the buildings that were on the corner through their plate glass windows and everything else, and trying to knock down the fire there, and then swinging it over to the church to try to slow the fire down there. I don't know how long we were doing this, but then all of a sudden, it was if, somebody blew a bugle and you started seeing these legions of firefighters coming down the street. And I remember this, I don't know where this firefighter was from. He comes up and he says, "Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing up on that truck? That engine, and I turned to him and I said, "What does it look like we're doing? You guys want to take over? Have at it," And so they came in and started manning a lot of the equipment that had been abandoned on the street or crushed. We went in and started looking for people that were trapped, and we found a firefighter that was down. We found it turned out to be a World Trade Center, a maintenance guy that was severely injured, a couple other people that needed immediate evacuation. I mean, 2 of them were very critical, a number of others that were serious. So our guys wound up getting a couple Stokes baskets off of the fire trucks. We brought them in, got these guys loaded up, and then there was an abandoned New York Presbyterian, I'll never forget it, abandoned New York Presbyterian ambulance on the street with most of its windows blown out. There was a Port Authority police officer off duty. They had, come to I don't know whether he was in proximity of the World Trade Center when this all went down. He joined up with us, a couple NYPD detectives, and we started moving these injured folks to this ambulance. And it was the first time that I physically came in contact and touched somebody that day. I was trying to, discipline myself not to get involved in any medical care. There's certainly a significant number of injuries, but trying to direct my folks to be those first point of contact to get people out to triage, locations. But we were in such a remote, distressed condition, and these folks were not in good shape. They were circling the drain. We said, "Look, let's get them loaded." Port Authority officer says, "I think they got some type of collection point down at the battery." So got them, the 2 serious ones loaded on the stretcher and on the big bench in the back, and then packed as many as we could in there with another agent, and he headed off. And we're going down towards the battery, and like I said, the windows are blown out. All this dust and debris is just blown through this unit. I've put a tube down into the throat of one of the guys that was barely breathing in order to kind of breathe for him. The other one was writhing in pain from burns. And we get down to the battery, and they open up the back doors, and it was like we were in a whole different world. Everything was clean. The people that opened up the back doors are all in pristine uniforms and so forth, and they looking at us, and the eyes, the expression that they had was, WTF, what is going on here? And so they, at that point, had set up some triage areas, and they had the ferries there to shuttle people over to New Jersey, I think to the hospitals over there, because the downtown, I think it was the downtown Beekman at the time, and then you had St. Vincent's were the two closest hospitals to the downtown area, where people were actually walking there to get care. And it was just, you had to be there to appreciate it. And I remember once we got everybody unloaded, I hopped back into the driver's seat of this ambulance because I was going to take it back up because I had my guys up there. And some guy comes up and, basically drags me out and says, "This is my ambulance. You're not going anywhere in this thing." And I said, "But I got to get up back." "No, you're not taking this. This is my ambulance." And I said, "Well, hey, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you." I got out, and just then there was an NYPD motor coming by, a scooter cop. And I jumped out in front of him. And again, I'm all dusted up and, and he stops, and I said, "You're taking me up to the site. I need to get back to my guys." He looks at me, he says, "Hop on the pack." And we scooted our way all the way up. I was able to, get together with my guys. But by then, I think it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we weren't finding anybody else. And then we were on site. Building 7 came down around 5 o'clock. That happened because when Tower 1 leaned over, it kind of carved out the front of Building 7. The fire got in there. And because we had lost so many firefighters and equipment and so forth, there was nobody to really kind of battle that.
Yeah.
So eventually the weight of the building just came down. And I had, initially been reported as missing. We eventually left the scene, and I forgot what time it was, that we wound up going, I think up to around Pier 57. They had set up some decon up there. And I had not had any real communications with my family to let them know I was okay. And we were subsequently moved back over to New Jersey on one of the water taxis. Our Newark office, a group of heroes over there, basically were shuttling guys back home. Because I was a supervisor, I got a car and wound up, I think it was close to midnight when I walked through the front door of my house and just, looked in the eyes of my family, who were just in a state of just, emotional turmoil and shock.
They didn't know where you were.
Yeah, we hugged and cried. My wife told me my eyes were as red as beets. I was just, it was just a surreal feeling. My kids were just, everyone was in shock. And it wasn't until then that I was able to sit down in front of the TV and for the first time realize that both towers had come down.
It's funny how that hits you after the fact, watching it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but I wound up being a ground zero supervisor, interagency supervisor, working with other folks like agencies that were in our building. We had, it was interesting. We had to secure presence at ground zero, especially around Building 7. We had some sensitive agencies that occupied that building, and there was sensitive documents that were on the ground. And a lot of people don't know that side of the story, but we really had to try to protect the area while they brought in teams to try to...
Because there was a CIA station in the building.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And then, between our stuff, their stuff, we... And there were some foreign individuals that were subsequently arrested for
Picking stuff up.
Oh,
really?
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. The one incident I got involved in were 2 Libyans. So, but yeah, it was. So you had a lot of things going on, and at that time, they said it was safe to breathe the air, and
I was going to ask if you had respiratory problems.
Yeah,
since then?
so I coughed. I was coughing for about 3 months. Initially coughing up some blood, not a lot, but it's definitely some irritation. It wasn't until almost 2 weeks later that they said, "Hey, the air's not good to breathe. You got to wear respirators."
Thanks.
Thanks. But the significance of that is that, my son Ryan at the time was about 14 years old, high school. My daughter Kelly was a couple years ahead of him. I think she might have been 11th grade or 10th grade. But he particularly had witnessed this from a hillside west of the city where we lived.
In Jersey.
Yeah. Pretty unobstructed view of, what was going on. And then he wasn't handling it too well. And we had lost a lot of people around us in our town that had worked.
Firefighters and cops.
Well, not so much, but the Wall Streeters. Like a lot of them had worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, who were up in Tower One and other places that, they didn't come home.
Parents of his classmates.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the firefighters and cops were Staten Island and out, on the peninsula, Long Island Peninsula. But out my way was a lot of the Wall Streeters and downtown financial district folks. And he said, "Hey, I need to go down there and understand what happened." And I said, "It's not a good idea." You can imagine 2 weeks afterwards, it was pretty, it was a horrible place to. I mean, it was. They finally had gone from rescue to recovery operations. They had brought in heavy equipment, still fires burning, but. I said, "Your mom's not going to like this. She's not going to go for it whatsoever." And I remember saying to her, something in my gut tells me he needs to do this. So I took him down there, and by then, like I said, they were, you had to wear respirators, so it was pretty easy to disguise him. I put him in a police jacket, respirator, helmet, and went down there with the understanding, or at least the agreement, that if I see anything that you're not handling it, we're out of there. No questions asked. Okay, Dad. We walked around. Took us about 3 hours or so, because it's just an immense. And I tried to point out where things were and what happened, and at the end I said, "You've seen enough." And he said, "Yeah, I appreciate you bringing me down here." The reason I tell that is because we get transferred back down to Washington. I go back to the White House, responsible for security operations there in that post 9/11 environment, and I've just been through this up in New York. So, I am not in the mood of, playing games.
Right.
Changes need to be made. We're a nation that is essentially under distract at war, and we've got to do business completely different. But he finishes up high school, and then comes home and announces that he enlisted in the Navy, and oh, by the way, I volunteered for the SEAL program. And
Where did he get that from?
Well, I never pushed him in that
Right.
direction, but I did believe that he, this is a choice that he was making.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure that he understood what that choice was. I said, "Why?" And he says, "What happened on 9/11 can't ever happen to us again. I'm going to be part of the solution." And like so many other men and women who dropped everything, stepped up on the line and raised their right hand to go, yourself, others, they were going to be part of the solution so it never happened again. And so he went in the Navy, went to Buds, broke his back in Hell Week.
Oh, shoot. How do you do that?
Well, he went into Hell Week with a stress fracture in his leg.
Mm-hmm.
Bobbled the log one day, and right before Hell Week started, and then he calls me and he says, I got a lot of pain in my leg, my left leg, and this is what happened. I said, well, you're gonna get it looked at? He says, nope. And he goes into Hell Week. Well, through the course of going through Hell Week, he's trying to shift his weight and everything else to compensate for the pain in his leg. He's taking some abuse from his teammates. How could he's kind of all kind of contorted. Trying to deal with his pain. He gets all the way through Hell Week. They get secured on a Friday, actually by Admiral Mullen, who became the CN, who became the chairman, and he couldn't get off the beach. He just, which is not unusual. You collapse after you've been through all that, and so they wind up, helping him back to his room, but he's not getting up, and so they come and check on him. They decide, hey, you need to go to Balboa, the hospital, see what's going on, and they put him through a bunch of X-rays, and his whole back lit up, stress fractures.
Oh man!
So they came back and said, hey, you got to go, heal up, and it's going to, kind of go into a light duty status for 3 months. Well, then, they were going to bump, push him out. Hey, 3 months?
Yeah.
You got to be kidding me, But as they were assessing that, I got to give credit to the commanding officer of the center, the training center, who came back and said, so what you're telling me, guys, is that you got a guy here that went all the way through Hell Week with a broken back, enduring, that amount of pain, makes it to the end, and you want to kick him out?
And it's also, what are we talking, 2004, 2005, around that time frame?
About 2007.
I think we know. I think we need all the people we can get.
Yeah. So they all kind of looked at each other and said, "Yeah, you're right." So they kept him in. He classed up a couple of classes later, and then finished up training. Went down to SOCM, to the 18 Delta training down in Bragg, and as soon as he got his diploma, graduated at the top of his class, with, immediately deployed to Iraq, and went out to the Anbar, Fallujah, Ramadi area, and was in contact almost immediately. Kind of seeing a whole different side, a whole different part of the world, and experiencing, things that, you just, you got to be there to do it.
It's amazing, like, hear that story from a father, to like taking your teenage son to ground zero, and then he surprises you, hey, I joined the Navy, Dad, and he's mixing it up with some bad actors in this, what do they call it, the Sunni Triangle of Death? I think.
Yes, exactly.
What was this sort of like, for you and your wife and your daughter? I mean, it affects the family, of course. Your son is now going back and forth between these war zones, and you must be like very proud of him, but at the same time, like, super worried.
Yeah, and by that time, I had retired out of the Secret Service, and then I spent a little touch and go out in industry, but I was pulled back into DoD to work the counter IED threat problem set with the Joint IED Defeat Organization. It was called JIATO.
Yep.
And I ran the Ops Intel platform called the COIC. It was the Counter IED Ops Intel Center. And so what's interesting about that is that as he's, now in theater, I've got visibility of all his, missions, and because we're supporting a lot of not only conventional but special operations. We had a lot of ODAs and task units and so forth, Omega teams that were out, in various parts of the battle space, and the IED was a major, condition of the battlefield. And it literally had paralyzed our movements in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think you can attest that Iraq was not Afghanistan, Afghanistan was not Iraq.
Right.
And that was the biggest mistake somebody could make, was thinking, okay, yeah, I've got, multiple deployments in Iraq, now I'm going to Afghanistan, I got this all figured out. Nope.
And the IEDs got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. And so I think we learned some really serious lessons that you know you can't underestimate your enemy and what they're able to do as far as their level of ingenuity, improvisation, and so forth. And because they inflicted a lot of pain on us, and we spent a lot of money to try to counter a threat that basically they could make a bomb for $10, a pressure plate, or for their ability to plant an underbelly explosive in the roadway that would flip a
right. Armored Humvee, no problem.
Yeah, like 30, 40, 50 feet in the air.
And I have to imagine that included, part of it is countermeasures, the jammers and all that stuff. Yeah. But part of it was also like supply chain compromise too, right? Like what can we do to stop them from getting these materials?
Yeah, great point. And that's where, my head was at. I from day one, we were never going to defeat this at the point of the blast.
Right.
But yet we had to increase our ability to maneuver on the battlefield because they had caught us with our pants down. We lost all our lessons learned from Vietnam. This will never happen again. It goes back to your point about doctrinal battle. Big army against big army on a...
The United States of amnesia.
Yeah, it's exactly right. We're our own worst enemy. We have such short memories. And, but, for me, it was about understanding the enemy networks and where we could poke them where they least expected. And I go back to follow the money. Once we understood how they were moving their money, and of course they used a lot of hawalas and so forth to kind of their own financial network to kind of move money and value around. But once we understood how they were doing that and who potentially was behind financing, because a lot of that financing came out of the opium trade,
Yep.
Especially in Afghanistan and Iraq, it was oil and some other commodity. But once we understand how that was moving, and Iraq was a lot more sophisticated. I mean, they actually had records. They had some infrastructure. They had, things that were more, akin to first world as opposed to Afghanistan, which was going back into the dark ages. Time stood still there. So really kind of trying to adapt to that. But we started looking at, especially in Afghanistan, what was going into the IEDs. A lot of it was AMPHO, ammonium nitrate, coming from Pakistan. So we started dissecting. I with the help of some very savvy business people, I started, along with my team, overlaying business models over the threat networks. Again, following the money. What are their motivations? What's their transportation? What's their recruitment? What's their, what does their supply chain look like? And then, by virtue of understanding that, we started seeing opportunities where we could poke the system further upstream and affect the flow of ammonium nitrate and start getting the attention of people that, for instance, if their ammonium nitrate shipments were not making it to where they wanted it to go, they were not going to get paid. So we would find ways of how we could interrupt that. And it was an interagency process, which was unique in and of itself.
Yeah.
Based on relationships, very often by people who did not want to come to the table because they had never done anything like that before, and others that wanted to maintain control over the whole ecosystem. So this was kind of a new approach, but one that we all learned a lot. We learned a lot from each other, and we learned that we could be pretty effective when we want to be, once we take our blinders off and park our egos at the door. Because it was all about preventing that point of blast. The point of blast that very much was responsible for the majority of the KIAs and the horrific injuries that a lot of our guys and gals came home with.
In the process of all this analysis, What were sort of your conclusions about like who is funding this, who is moving the explosives? Like, are they doing it for money or for ideological reasons? Were there any kind of like big conclusions that you came to from that?
Yeah, and so what you bring up is a good point. You have to really characterize the backdrop of where all this is occurring to understand that. So if you're down in the Helmand area or the southern, Canada, it's about drugs down there. Mm-hmm. It's preservation of, their opium, and their, what they're growing down there. I mean, this is a big cash cow. You go further up north, it's different motivation. It's some of it's, where you get more of the Al Qaeda extremist strongholds is more ideology, and other parts of it was, hey, we don't want you here,
right?
Like Iraq,
why are you guys here?
Yeah, we went in and did a leg sweep on their whole freaking infrastructure and economy. Instead of just saying, maybe we should just take the top level dudes out
and walk away.
Yeah, walk away, and then help them reconstitute and restabilize. Instead, we completely threw everybody into unemployment and chaos. And I would, and whether you agree or not, I would submit that, hey, if somebody did that to me and I had a family to feed, and my goal is to try to keep a roof over the head, provide the food and shelter and a sense of security. If that's jeopardized, you better believe I'm going to do whatever I have to do to maintain that for my family. And I think that was a lot of, were some of the basic, issues with Iraq.
I had even heard a story about Afghanistan where the Iranians were giving IEDs to the Taliban in exchange for raw opium. And they had some sort of, literally a drug deal going for that, which had to be shut down.
Yeah. I mean, the Iranians had a significant kind of subsurface kind of, the evil that was, flowing from Iran, especially with the more sophisticated IEDs that we saw in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And, I can't get into it, but it's still some sensitive, source, connections, but there was definitely some outside influences in both war theaters, mm-hmm. that complicated, despite what we were doing to ourselves in some of our, political interventions and so forth. There definitely was outside influences that were trying to destabilize and affect the outcome of those two conflicts.
So tell me about how you became the sergeant at arms, which is, as I understand it, it's like the police officer over the Senate in this case.
Well, that's one job. So I left DoD in the 2014 timeframe. Kind of did another touch and go, supporting the intelligence community and defense with large data. And then my phone rang one day, and I didn't look at who was calling. And next thing you know, it's the Hill that the administrations are changing, because of the election. They had they were looking for a sergeant at arms in the Senate. Somebody had handed up my name, and I'm still looking for, who did that. But I answered my phone, and it wound up being, Leader McConnell's office. Hey, we got your name. We'd like you to come up, and we'd like to talk to you about this sergeant at arms position. So I went up, met with them, met with the minority leader at the time was Harry Reid, and basically said, they told me what the job was all about, and it was, you were multiple hats. So the most public one is where you're the chief protocol officer. So anytime you have the president, foreign heads of state, whatever, you're there meeting them, escorting them around, and so forth. The second is your chief operating officer. So everything short of legislative action on the floor, you're responsible
The
for.
administrative side of things.
Yeah, the parking, the IDs, setting up their regional offices to include their security of those offices, the furniture that is in their offices, maintenance, you name it. It was everything other than the legislative, to keep the wheels turning, the belts moving in the institution. And the third component is the law enforcement, the security side, where together with the House Sergeant at Arms, you have oversight of the chief of the police, of the Capitol Police. It's 22, probably even larger now, post January 6th, where you ensure the safety and security of the 275 acres that the Capitol resides on. In addition to providing physical security, protective security to the succession to the president. So a number of the leaders in the House get physical protection, almost like Secret Service protection. Mm-hmm. And then case by case, you have to at times put protection on individuals that draw a lot of attention or have significant threat. So you have all three of those things moving at the same time. And fortunately, I had a great staff. They've been up there a long time. It's a very political environment. It's an out-of-body experience, I got to tell you, because coming in as an outsider, I had done some detail time up there earlier in my Secret Service career, where I got detailed up on the Hill for 2 years. So it was not like it was totally foreign to me, but this role as Sergeant at Arms was a significant role up there. You got to see a lot of what was going on behind the curtains.
The fat man behind the curtain.
Yeah. Dealing with every little problem that comes up there. We had a number of incidents. We had the ball field attack. We had we had shootings at the visitor center. We had just a number of a major train accident. A lot of things that some knucklehead landing on the west side in a helicopter. A little homemade helicopter, if you remember that. He was a disgruntled postal employee. It was, I'll tell you, it was challenging. I liked the challenge. I did not like the politics. Every decision that is made up there is made based on not practicality, largely not on common sense, but on political implication. What are the political consequences of any decision? And to me, at times that was a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, because you're like, I'm just trying to organize the parking for this event. And they're like, oh, well.
Yeah. Or you're trying to make decisions and choreograph things in the best interest of the institution, to keep, really
people safe, yeah.
People safe, to keep the distractions to a minimum so they can do the nation's business. And sometimes it was a tough uphill climb. And but a lot of great people up there trying to do good things. I really can't comment on their state of dysfunction right now, but
I've heard from Secret Service guys that the Capitol Police are actually kind of like used and abused in a lot of ways, and like morale is not great.
Yeah, I mean, some fine people in the department, but there's definitely some the dynamics that go on with the department that are not traditional in other departments. And so, yeah, we'll just leave it at that.
Sure. So as you're doing all this, what does Ryan's journey look like?
So, as I said, he came out of training at a BUD/S, went to 18 Delta, which is, the Special Operations Combat Medical Course. Really, I'd gone through it years before, and really a top-notch school down at Fort Bragg. I think it really, prepares a lot of the medics for what they are potentially going to get involved in, but it's nothing like real-world conditions that really kind of bring that to reality. Does his first pump to Iraq, as I said, out to the western areas. 6 months there, comes back, does a couple J sets. I think he went to Honduras, where he wound up, experiencing intestinal parasites. Not a pleasant.
The water.
The water.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great that you don't drink the water, but if you're drinking other stuff with the ice cubes
Yes.
made from the water,
Yeah.
that you're kind of
If
setting
you're a
yourself.
SEAL, maybe you can't avoid the water.
That's right. So, but he comes back. He does a second pump into Iraq up in the northern area on an HVI mission. He's augmented to a special mission unit, Army special mission unit up there, and.
I wonder if I crossed paths with him. What year was that?
About 2010, 11?
Okay, maybe just after. I was there like 2009, like Mosul area.
Yep, that's exactly
Yeah.
where they were operating. Had come across some pretty nasty stuff up there, some torture chambers and other,
Oh, yeah.
so you probably saw some of that. Nasty place,
Mhm.
and that's actually where he was actually awarded a Bronze Star working for that unit. Also out of Bragg. Kind of unusual that they would, put a frogman in for, but he really enjoyed his time with them. Gave him a whole new experience.
Sure.
To the point where he was almost considering, hey, I wonder what it would be like to maybe, jump to the,
Yeah. He's going to be a lifer.
yeah. So, but he finished that tour, and we started, you're going to see changes in your son going through those experiences, and we saw those changes, maturing, kind of become a lot more serious. They had a need for an experienced medic in Afghanistan, so they put a call out, and he was single. He says, "I'll make the jump." So he did literally back-to-back deployments. He came home for 2 weeks, reset, went to Aruzgan to Tarin partnered up with the Australians there, and again, pretty hot area. Got his first taste of mountain sickness, working at altitudes. And he came home from that, and that's when we started seeing some changes that were not what I would say, normal. He started complaining about, not being able to sleep, and, he a little bit more short-fused. He stopped. He wasn't as gregarious as he was, which was significant because he was always kind of he was a quiet guy, but when he spoke, people listened. He had, some substantive stuff to say, important stuff. He liked to joke around and be a little bit of a prankster, but we saw all that kind of change. And then his living girlfriend for like 5 years, they wound up breaking up. He wound up going to sniper school, again, came out on the top of his class there, and then deployed to his second pump into Afghanistan, which is in Helmand province. He went to some, Fort Apache outpost way up near the Kajaki Dam, where they were constantly getting
Helmand was crazy.
Yeah, and then eventually they shut that base, that fob down, and then they got pulled back to Leatherneck, where they operated out of there. A lot of counter drug stuff. They were working with DEA and
Fast
others.
teams.
Yeah, fast teams, and then he had a couple near miss helicopter insertions, near crashes, which really kind of rattled him. He said to me, I don't know why I'm still alive right now. We should be dead. But came home from that, and then he left Team 7, and then went into their training unit and became the lead petty officer for the Special Operations Urban Combat Training, they call it SALC. And from there, he continued, to simulate real-world conditions and, for urban
trainees.
operations, breaching charges, concussion grenades, flashbangs, doing dynamic entries, and then they would have their range time with the rockets, the mortars, times with the helicopters, and again experienced almost a new near crash out, in the training environment. They normally work with the 160th, but they had brought in a different unit that had never done anything like that before, and they almost, the kind of overzealous, pilots that wound up almost wiping out with him and others aboard. So helicopters are not, were not a favorite source of transportation for him. And of course, as you know, we've lost more SEALs to, in combat operations, more SEALs to helicopter-related incidents.
Oh, because Extortion 17.
17,
Yeah.
yeah. Red Wings. And then we've had a number of 60s to go down. But he was not a fan of helicopters. He, after about a year at SALC, again, the issues with sleep and so forth became worse. Started complaining of anxiety. He just stopped smiling. Had, issues with some depression. Again, I think a lot of that was from lack of sleep, and
Yep.
he started having, memory issues, balance, issues, and started questioning, hey, what's happening to me?
Was he also struggling with making that transition from the teams to the training cell? Was that something that kind of like threw him for a curveball?
I'm not sure. He really liked doing the training stuff. I mean, the reason they put him in there was because it was experience, and he had a knack of kind of, delivering the message,
Right.
either positively or taking him to the woodshed, but he was really into, sharing his experience and insight, about the conditions, in the war zones and how to prepare them. The deploying platoons. But I think that what really got to him was when he started feeling these other things that he was struggling with, that he felt like he was losing control.
Right. He didn't feel like himself anymore.
Yeah. And then it got to the point where, am I becoming a safety, risk? Am I able to do my job? And the worst thing in a team dynamic that we've been involved in is you don't want to fail your brothers.
Yeah. And he's used to operating at such a high level.
Yes.
Being so high functioning.
Yeah.
And now he's having trouble with basic stuff.
Yeah. And then you were, how are they viewing me? I mean, am I holding my...
Am I letting them down?
Yeah. And so, we wound up getting them to NICO here, the National Intrepid Center of Excellence in Bethesda, Walter Reed. They freaking looked at him from, stem to stern, top to bottom. Basically had diagnosed PTSD and hearing loss and, anxiety, depression. Alcohol played a role.
Sure.
Because, every one of these folks you talk to are dealing with pain. whether it's physical pain, moral injury, spiritual pain, whatever. They're trying to numb that pain.
Right.
Some of them are using alcohol to try to get to sleep. He say that, when I get to sleep, then I have nightmares. See some pretty nasty stuff over there. That's where the moral injury comes in. And then I also think there's a unique dynamic with the medics. On one side of the brain, they're trained to heal people. To try to stop the badness from happening, and especially if they lose a teammate, that has a huge impact. And then on the other side, they're a shooter. And 1 minute, you're taking somebody down. On the other minute, that same individual you may be trying to,
There's a lot of pressure and a lot of anxiety for the medics, I think, that I've come to appreciate more from interviewing people. Because of that dynamic you mentioned, that you're so afraid of letting your boys down, and the medic's job is to keep everyone alive.
Right.
And so you'll have a soldier who lost a leg and he gets over it and moves on with his life, but the medic is traumatized by the event. Was that my fault? Did I do it right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure on those guys.
Yeah, and you go through 18 Delta, and generally you're saving your patients. Because but when the reality, having been a paramedic for almost 50 years, you don't save all your patients,
right.
and sometimes your actions unintentionally may contribute to their demise, because there's a lot of things going on, and
right.
You might miss something, or distractions.
Yeah, and some of it's in God's hands. It's not all up to you.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's stuff that's out of your control, but you still take it, you still internalize it, to your point.
Oh, yeah, it's my fault.
Yeah. And so I think that's an extra burden that the medics carry, that I've seen, the medics carry. And but he got to the point where it was almost hard to recognize him as our son. He just started to unravel, and he went to go get help. And one of the things that drove him to go get help is that he was seeing a lot of his brother's teammates have suffering some of the same stuff, and he was trying to draw attention to it. And I remember telling him, "Hey Ryan, just be careful. They tend to shoot the messenger." Oh no, Dad, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. And unfortunately, when the low-hanging solutions didn't work, and they focused on alcohol as opposed to, hey,
what's the root issue?
What's the root issue? Yeah. And then the labels come, and depending on who you have in the command elements, are they truly going to look out for their guys and do what they have said that they would do, is take care of them and not leave somebody behind, or are they more worried about their careers and not dealing with issues? And unfortunately, he was in that dynamic where he had some leadership that, I don't have time for this, I don't want this. So it was, if the low-hanging fruit, solutions didn't work, then let's get rid of the problem. And that's what happened. He wound up, he wanted to make it a career. He loved the teams, but it got to the point where he felt that, he was, being kind of kicked to the curb.
Mm-hmm. Feeling
and,
ostracized by the unit.
We call it institutional betrayal.
Right.
It's a term that's really gaining some traction when, you got, especially these high performing, these racehorses, that have put it all on the line. Everything on the line to be the best that they can be, to be part of a team dynamic, just mission profiles that are just incredibly important for the safety and security of this nation. Suddenly, when they, start having issues, the system turns on them. And you know, and there's nothing worse than, you know, feeling that your reputation is being kind of, you know, chewed up bit by bit. And I think that, you know, that just adds a bunch of additional wounds. And especially now with, as we're learning that, you know, largely the focus in a lot of these conditions and assessment has been psychiatric and mental health focused. But we're now learning that, and this is what I tell a lot of guys and gals, that, hey, how could you not be banged up?
Yeah.
With everything you've done in training and operations, what this nation's asked you to do, how could you not be injured?
Dude that's deployed 12 times, like, yeah.
Yeah.
How could you not be?
Yeah, and so, you know, you're not crazy. You may very well be injured.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, everything's defaulted almost since World War I towards a psychiatric mental health diagnosis. You know, we've been calling it soldier's heart, battlefield psychosis, combat neurosis, and now we call it like PTSD. And it's only till recently, and a large part to Ryan's story, that we're finding out that there may be underlying, you know, undiagnosed traumatic brain injury.
Was Ryan medically discharged from the Navy?
Well, not initially. He was honorably discharged,
Okay.
and then subsequently medically discharged on appeal because they had not done the right thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but what happened with Ryan after he left the Navy?
Well, you know, they basically said, hey, you know, we've done everything for him that we can. You know, the VA's a better place for him to be, you know.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
debatable.
Yeah, and he, by that point, he was, you know, they basically were treating him like he was broken, you know, not injured, not, I mean, you know, the possibility of having, you know, a TBI was casually mentioned, but by then the command, like I said, was, to me, you know, they were violating our core ethos of not leaving somebody behind, and the expediency of getting rid of the problem by saying that this broken frogman could no longer, you know, operate and do his job. You know, let's kick him to the VA. And you know, when he left the Navy, he was almost unrecognizable. And so we got him into the VA, and the VA was a shit show. You know,
They weren't prepared to deal with that, I don't think,
No.
at that time.
No, they weren't. And
Yeah.
they didn't have the right people. They were trying some novel programs that deal with the post-traumatic stress issues, but still, you know, we were in that space and we didn't know what we didn't know. And I mean, there were some really good people at the VA that we met, but, you know, they were almost as equally frustrated with their bureaucracy as we were. And so his experience at the VA was not the greatest.
Yeah.
And to your point, you're spot on. They weren't prepared. They just didn't know how to deal with what they were seeing.
Right.
And very much relied on kind of the one size fits all instead of one size fits one.
And when was it that this TBI issue finally comes to a head and you start to realize, oh, this is what this was?
Yeah, he in the first year that he was discharged out of the Navy under VA care, he was into a number of programs. He went down to the Brain Treatment Center down in Dallas.
Oh, good.
Went through that program, got some insight. Went out, did some transcranial stimulation, magnetic stimulation out in Long Beach, California. It was also getting some, you know, counseling locally in the Washington, D.C., Annapolis area where we live. And, but he, he would feel a little bit better, and then, he kind of go into a slump.
Right.
And then it come back up again. He was not the easiest guy to deal with. He felt, like I said before, that he had abandoned his boys. He had a sense of guilt and shame.
And he got a raw deal. He didn't leave the teams the way he wanted to.
No, and never really had the closure. Nor did they have closure with him, which is important.
Right.
I mean, he left so fast that his own teammates didn't even know he was gone. And there's a backstory to that, but I don't want to get into that, and it's command related. But they, we're sitting around a fire one night. This is like March of 2017, and he says to me, Dad, something's wrong with my head, but nobody's listening. And he was saying that all along. And that's important to understand, that nobody was listening. They were just hanging labels on him. By that time, he had an endless flow of medications that were coming in the mail.
You told me, I think in the things you sent me, that they prescribed him over 40 different medications.
Yeah, over the course, everything from over-the-counter potions, lotions, to creams, to high-end psychotropic.
And none of that shit has to do with what he actually had going on.
No,
really.
it made it worse.
Yeah.
As we come to find out, it made it worse. He was sitting around this fire, and he says, "Look, I'm broken up inside, and I don't think I'm going to live all that long." And of course, I said, "Look, I'm here. We're going to get through this. I mean, we're going to figure this out." Yeah, I'm just broken up inside, and I don't even feel like I'm in my own body anymore. And I said, I asked him, I said, "You think about hurting yourself?" No, I never go that way. Never go that way. Well, look, we just got to hang together. Well, I'm here for you. And then a month later, my wife and I came home from an overnight trip, and we found that, he had taken his life in the basement of our home.
Oh my God.
He was dressed in a SEAL Team 7 T-shirt, wearing a pair of red, white, and blue board shorts, and had illuminated a shadow box with all his medals and ribbons, insignia, you name it, things that I'd made for him the Christmas before, just to kind of
give him that closure a little bit.
Yeah, kind of tell him how proud we were of him, and I still was of him. He was a great guy. He had a great ability to abstract, and like I said, he was like E.F. Hutton. When he spoke, people listened. He had that type of personality, and he was good at what he did. He not only as a medic, but as a sniper, and then as a trainer. And but when we found him, I'll tell you what, it just ripped our hearts in half. I mean, that was a wound and pain that all the stuff that I had been through, I had never experienced anything so instantly horrific as that. And before his death, he says to us, "Look, if anything happens to me, I want you to donate my body, my brain, for traumatic brain injury research, for breacher syndrome research." He heard something was going on. And, the morning that we found him, and the word gets out pretty quick, I mean, within hours, JSOC had it, and had mentioned the loss, and it was just, it literally just, spread like wildfire from East Coast to West Coast. And next thing you know, we're getting a call from a gal, Jen Collins, who about a year before almost 2 years before, had lost her Navy SEAL husband, David Collins, to suicide. And she says to me that when he was lost, she donated his brain to a research effort that was looking at the connection of military blast exposure to brain injury. And she gave me some background, some points of contact, and I called them, and they were just wonderful. They were based out of, Bethesda, Walter Reed, but they were in a satellite location in Rockville, just outside of the big medical complex, and so we satisfied his wish and donated his brain, and about 2 months later they called us in and said, hey, we've got some things that we like to share. So I sat down with the neuropathologist. He's a world-renowned, expert in just, examining the brain, and his original focus was in chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the CTE that you hear about with the sports players and so forth.
Yep.
But now he was into a whole new pattern of injury, and he said, Ryan, we found an undiagnosed level of severe microscopic brain injury, uniquely, and he emphasized, uniquely related to blast exposure. We're only seeing it in those warriors that have been exposed to blast, whether it's one big blast or repeated low-level blasts. And he says, Ryan had this interfaced acronucleal scarring where scar tissue following this the movement of blast waves through the brain, you got the white matter and the gray matter. They're two different densities. It's almost like lemon meringue pie. You got the white.
Thanks for that metaphor. Yeah.
But they're two different, kind of consistencies. But if you shake it hard enough, that meringue and that lemon gel will separate. And that's what happens apparently in the brain, is that where these white-gray matter borders interface, where blood vessels come through the brain anatomy, and where the brain bumps up against a fluid border, that's where they were seeing the scarring.
It's like micro lesions, right?
Micro lesions, right? It's almost like when you look at it, it's almost like a shading.
I've heard it described as like brown dust.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And as opposed to the CTE, which are more of these impact related, but very localized lesions. So we can actually see kind of these little not dots, but literally lesions in the brain. And if you get enough of them, it starts affecting the brain's ability to communicate, and that's what they've been finding out with these football players and others that have played contact sports. But the blast exposure injury is something that goes all the way through the brain, and what we're finding out now through some recent studies is a lot of that exposure is coming in through the eye sockets, through the nasal passages, through the mouth, and then up underneath the chin into the foramen magnum that is getting to the base of the brain. But the real area that they're finding that is kind of the concentration of where this damage occurring is right behind the eyes in the frontal lobe, that is responsible for all our executive functions, our go, no-go, our regulatory decision-making. Base of the brain really regulates your sleep patterns and so forth. So when you start seeing where this damage is occurring, and you crosswalk it over on what that part of the brain does as far as controlling body functions, you start getting answers as to why somebody is projecting certain signs and symptoms and certain voicing certain struggles. But the problem is that we can't see this yet in a living person, much like the CTE that they're dealing with the contact sports players. And we see very little, and that's the other thing, we see very little CTE in the military unless they have played contact sports
Right.
before they've come in. So this interfaced astroglial scarring, this IAS, is unique to blast exposure. And so the challenge now is how do we make visible the invisible? And that's where a lot of my efforts are now to help, elevate this narrative so that we get a level of research priority, develop the capabilities to see this in a living person, which then will take this out of this gray zone. It will be undeniable for somebody that, may be injured as a result of blast exposure.
When you zoom out a little bit and you start to look at multiple cases, multiple soldiers and soldier suicides, you see some of those indicators over and over again. We've had Kate Rockline on this show a few times to talk about Michael Frody. She's the mother of Michael's children, and Michael was an Army intelligence guy who took his own life. Like your son, marriage fell apart, relationships deteriorating, not able to find his own vehicle in the parking lot anymore.
Right.
Guy who was high functioning is now low functioning. Post-it notes everywhere to keep track of what the hell he's doing. We've talked about Bill Mulder, his wife at the time, Sydney, has been on the show also. Their relationship dissolved in the run-up to him taking his own life. I mean, you see these things over and over and over again. The tragedy of it is, as you were describing, you can only see the injury after the person has passed, as of now. Otherwise, we're just trying to treat symptoms, right?
That's right. And again, we don't know what we don't know. So, as I said, since World War I, when we first introduced explosives to the battlefield, this is, they've come up with different names to explain
Shell
these
shock.
conditions.
Yeah.
And the reason we call it invisible wounds because, you look at these warriors and they look okay. It's not like they have, disfiguring wounds. It's not like they have, an amputation or some other, visible indicator that they're hurt. But they're banged, like Ryan said around that fire, I'm banged up on the inside.
Yeah.
And
It's interesting he intuited what the problem was.
well, what's also interesting, but I want to address something you said about the wives.
Sure.
The wives are the first. They're the front. They were
They're
the
the closest
forward
to it.
edge sensor. Every one of these wives picked this up before anybody else, before the teammates, and in many cases, the teammates themselves are struggling. So as a senior chief once said to me, this is the bent measuring stick analogy, where everything has bent so far off of the normal.
Yeah.
They
don't know what normal is.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so it's we have to figure this out. This is an insidious threat to our fighting force. It's not that we can to stop the operations, but we have to do things smarter.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we need the science to help us, find the path forward.
Tell us a bit about, I believe you worked on some legislation with Kate. Was that in the NDAA?
Yeah, so, and she's a force within herself. One thing I did want to adjust before I get into
Sure.
that, and I know we've been talking a while, but something that's significant about Ryan's passing, he knew all along what was going on. Something's wrong with my head, nobody's listening. He wanted his body donated for research, but we were able to get into his computer afterwards, and he had downloaded dozens of research studies and articles on traumatic brain injury and different conditions within the brain and subsequent second, third order effects of, neurological
He was in the
disease.
process of self-diagnosis.
Right. And also was looking up all these freaking horrible medications that they had put him on. And afterwards, I had asked a number of neurologists, in view of a undiagnosed brain injury and this list of medications that they, what's your assessment? And they said, did more harm than good.
Yeah.
So it was, again, we were in that space. We didn't know what we didn't know. And aside from some of my heartburn and scar tissue with some of his command leadership, I do believe that there were a lot of people, in his command in the community that were trying to do the right thing for the right reason all the wrong way. Now, when this happened, I come in contact with Dr. Kate Rockland, and she is like, you've had her on here. I mean, she's not a bashful woman.
No.
She goes, she goes right for the jugular. She's very smart. She's a great researcher with a respected reputation. But she's focused on, what's going on here specifically in the soft community. And so we got talking, and we just could start finishing each other's sentences, just like I could finish Cindy Mulder's sentences. And, same with Jen Collins, who really I give great credit to, kind of helping move the ball and exposing us to some of these options. But Kate, really, I think she's trying to, in her approach, is try to knit together that, hey, there may be a biological injury here that also requires a level of mental health support.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, those communities kind of operate separate from each other. And a lot of this goes back to the early 1900s when psychiatry kind of split off from clinical medicine. And they've been operating in separate paths. And that's why a lot of this has defaulted towards psychiatric mental health, is because it was kind of the only explanation they could come up with as to why people were coming off the battlefield all kind of changed. We didn't have the hard evidence that there's an injury, underlying injury. Now that body of evidence is growing to a point where it's undeniable. And we're putting a lot of pressure on Congress, on the Department of Defense and the VA to start prioritizing this. The past couple of years, we've been able to successfully lobby and get NDAA, National Defense Authorization language in to start directing the Department of Defense and the VA to look at this, and look at this with a sense of urgency. We're recognizing that over 80% of this exposure may be happening in the training environment.
Mm-hmm.
So our heavy, long barrel weapons, our 50 cals, maybe even our 7.62 caliber weapons, we just don't know yet. And here's part of the challenge: we don't know what the threshold is yet. The pounds per square inch of force.
Firing 30 Carl Gustav rounds can't be good for you.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're finding is that, so is this, the department put out a 4 PSI memo, which was basically based on research that had occurred back, we've been able to track it back to the 60s, where, they were concerned about eardrum ruptures. And so they determined that at 5 PSI, you were susceptible to an eardrum rupture. So the department, in its effort to try to at least put a line in the sand, a couple years ago came up with a 4 PSI to at least give a starting point. But we have yet to characterize this mechanism of injury. And this is one of the biggest frustrations I have with the Department of Defense, is that, hey, you've spent billions and billions of dollars on, trying to deal with stuff like this, mental health, suicide prevention, all this, but you still haven't spent almost no money on trying to characterize what's actually happening, which is kind of like a fundamental start point for anything. You got to understand what the enemy is, you know? And so Kate and I have been able to, and some others, Jana Merceri Brooks, a few other just dedicated folks have been trying to get the ear of Congress, try to paint a picture that, look, this is a threat to our total force readiness and resiliency. It's an insidious threat to our national security. And as we talked at the front end of this interview, it's about preserving the thinking warrior brain. That thinking warrior brain gives us the edge against our near peers and our adversaries. So if this repeated blast exposure, you know, bit by bit is tearing that brain circuitry apart, tearing apart our ability to really to be flexible, adaptive, innovative, to make decisions on the battlefield, to act, then we need to figure this out.
I think, you know, Ryan and Michael Frody and Bill Mulder are all examples of guys, they wanted to stay in the force.
That's right.
They wanted to stay, they wanted to continue serving, but they had to separate or leave it behind earlier than they wanted to because of this particular issue.
And one of the biggest, and I got to give, you know, General Brian Fenton just left as command. Yesterday, I saw Tony Thomas at an event. We've got, you know, Bill McCraven, Tim Szymanski, who was the DCOM down at SOCOM and led the NSW community. He and I are tied at the hip on this. We've got other leaders that are grabbing onto this and recognizing that this is a threat to our Special Operations Force, but it's just not to them, it's to our conventional forces too.
Yeah.
We're seeing this in our mortarmen,
Artillery
in artillery.
guys,
The New York Times had done a number of profiles on, you know, these exposures. Now we're seeing it in our fast boat operators with the shaking, almost like a shaken baby syndrome, where the brain is being rattled, you know, by vibration and impact to the point where it's like turning into jelly, and we're trying to understand this. So we're almost at a point where the stuff that we're building to fight with is exceeding the human factors of our own body. And so we need to find that balance. We can't stop fighting, we can't stop being effective on the battlefield, and we can't challenge our ability to be lethal on the battlefield. But we've got to try to do this smarter, especially if it's 80% of this is occurring in the training environment. Yes. And to your point, going out and firing 30 Carl G's, I mean, and then coming back with your freaking head, you know, about to explode. You know, you got blood dripping out of your nose, you've blown eardrums. These are all signs of head injury.
And I would, if people want to go deeper on the explosive side, I'd encourage folks to go back and find the interview we did with Chuck O'Connor, who was the SEAL Team 6. I think he was their first master breacher, and he talks about this a lot.
Yeah.
And, you know, it talks about, you know, also if you're a special operator, maybe once or twice during your career, there are times where you're going to have to be close to the charge because it's a hijacked aircraft.
Right.
You know, it's something high priority. But we don't need to be exposing guys to that over and over and over again in a training environment.
No. And again, there's ways through this. You're already starting at the deck plate, dirt level, seeing range safety officers and others starting to take some new approaches through their training. You know, standing further back where we've got some measurements now where we're starting to see what these blast over pressure values are coming off the weapons. And in some cases, for example, the 120 millimeter mortar, if you just drop your head down a foot from the opening of that tube, you reduce your exposure by 50%. I mean, things like that, you're standing off at a certain angle by a certain distance. They're looking to come up with a dosimeter-like device to kind of, you know, give you a sense of how much exposure that you've had. But if we're able to come up with new imaging and diagnostic blood markers to qualify that somebody has been injured, that's going to take this out of the gray area. But I predict this, Jack. We have already had the telltales in front of us. When you look at somebody's training and operational profile, when you look at their symptom presentation, there's a number of things that we have right now that we can, test, cognitive function, changes in your physical stability that are absolute indicators that says, hey, maybe this person may be injured. They're not crazy, but the diagnostics will absolutely, be a definitive qualification that they're injured.
Are the biomarkers I've run into this subject actually reporting on Havana syndrome as well.
Oh, don't get me going about that.
So the biomarkers has to do with the proteins that are secreted when the brain is injured. But you have to test the blood within how many hours? 4 hours?
Yeah, and that's what they're trying to find. So it may be a presumptive test that says, so if it turns positive, it at least puts into that clinician's mind, hey, based on this event, I may have a brain injury here. Whereas now it's like, well, we'll send them to imaging. They don't see anything. And so, the clinician says, well, okay, I'll refer you for a psychiatric or a mental health referral, when in fact they have a brain injury. We just can't see it yet. So I think we're getting there. It's real important. The Havana syndrome. So I told you I had time with JIATO, the cold counter. So the fielding of jammers and so forth. My big concern is that, as we've heard about burn pits and the exposure to, potentially all
World Trade Center respiratory issues.
The burn pits and everything else we were burning and that stuff. We're finding out now that some of those metals and contaminants were crossing the blood-brain barrier, could be factored into this calculus. The other is that we never would leave the wire without those jammers lit up. And whether it was vehicle mounted, whether it was backpack mounted, whether it was stationary to protect a fob or whatever, all those jammers did was project energy out. High volumes of energy to try to defeat the enemy's ability to remotely detonate an IED. And you got to ask yourself, so what's it doing to the brain that's within inches or feet of that antenna?
I think we always thought, what happens if I get my gonads in front of this thing? We probably should have been thinking about our brain.
Some roasted chestnuts. But this is a complex issue, but the brain health piece is something that we've got to get on top of, because I do think it's an insidious threat to our fighting force. And it's just not special operations, conventional forces. We work hand in glove. It's just that special operations right now is leading the charge on this. And with a complete, my discussions with the Pentagon, with a complete view on how can we quickly get this in the conventional forces to buy down the risk on the front end.
So as far as getting to the right place on this issue, tell us a little bit about some of the endeavors that are going on, some of the foundations that you work with. What are sort of these lanes of influence that you're working on?
So a couple things right now, very much in support of a new study that's going on. They call it Reblast Precision, which is occurring up in Harvard Mass General, supported by SOCOM. It's looking at 100 to 200 special operators, putting them through live scans now. We've kind of figured, they've got some brilliant folks up there that have kind of figured out the formula to be able to see this injury in a living person. So now we're going to test this out by running a number of operators through. There's going to be a cadre of operators that are just, fresh out of the production, so to speak, training. And then there's going to be the cadre of operators that have had their, 10, 15 year, 20 year, careers, certainly with exposures, and see what they see between those two cadres, and try to calibrate, the diagnostic equipment and also the development of the blood markers, to your point.
You got to get the baseline.
Is there any protein spillage, enzymes, whatever? And again, that is all, goes hand in glove with this whole baseline effort that you hear about, where they're trying to kind of establish a reflective baseline early in somebody's career.
Yep.
That periodically they can reflect against to look for changes. So there's a lot of things going on. The other thing that came out of legislation last year, and I got to claim credit for putting this in the idea in their heads, and that is, let's get the skin through the appropriations, the acquisition process, get the weapons manufacturers and the ammunition manufacturers get their skin in the game. Help, before we buy their weapon, before we buy their ammunition, they've got to come up with measurements, blast overpressure measurements.
Yeah, the BOP charts are bullshit.
Yeah, and so, let's get them involved. Otherwise, we don't buy their shit.
Yeah.
And then, so there's a lot of things going on the preventative side, but hopefully with the diagnostics, we get better at the precision treatment and care on the warrior side. Last night, I just attended an event with Headstrong, a great organization. The Headstrong Project is really looking at the mental health side of the PTSD, recognizing that there may be, with the new information coming about the blast overpressure, there may be an underlying injury. So combining those two together. I also am affiliated with the Invisible Wounds Foundation. I'm on their board with some really top-notch people, neurologists, neuropathologists, neurosurgeons, other researchers that are looking at this and focusing. And then finally, affiliated with the Troops First Foundation. And we're sponsoring for a number of years now a campaign called Warrior Call. And it's simple, it's grassroots, it's focused on defeating isolation. Simply, you make a call to somebody that served in uniform, you take a call from them, you have an honest conversation. You sense that they're having some issues, and we help get them connected to resources like Headstrong, resources like the Cohen Veterans Network, to the Marcus Institute, home base up in Boston. So there are options for these warriors, but when they get to a place of isolation, especially if they're wrestling with some of these mental health and potentially undiagnosed traumatic brain injury issues, which according to DoD and VA estimates could be well over 500,000 warriors that may have been exposed and may have some level of brain injury. There is hope. We got people working on it. There's hope. These folks are not alone. We've got some great organizations that can help. This is a kind of an iterative march forward. I know that there's a lot of other options out there allied to, stellate ganglion block, transcranial magnetic stimulation, HBOT, you hear a lot about, the psychedelic assisted therapy. All these have to be looked at, not only individually, but in concert. And once we understand what we're dealing with, and I go back to mechanism of injury, I think we're going to be in a better position to find out what combinations of therapies help somebody get to a better place. And I'm not ruling out, medicines, but we got to be a little bit more judicious and appropriate with what medications we're using, depending on what conditions that we're dealing with.
Have you seen anything promising as far as like protective gear, like helmets, face masks, and things like that might help?
Yeah, great question. I mean, one of the concerns is helmets. We built these ballistic helmets, but now we're finding out that they're actually trapping, they may be trapping the blast wave up. So they're looking at new designs now that would help the vent or at least reduce the impacts, and also potentially build in some sensors that, again, we could help track, exposures. Maybe going back to floppy hats. There's talk about some of that too. I think that also some of the kit, as we see the changes over time, has become, much more efficient. I think we have, I think by elevating the narrative, making people aware of what's going on, drives a level of innovation, and certainly a motivation to solve, some of these challenges. So there are changes happening. I think that they're looking at greater reset times, because if you the body keeps score. It's a great book out. The body keeps score. But if you don't give the body a chance to heal, it just it becomes more and more vulnerable to further injury, and it's hard to come back. As you get to a point where it's hard to come back.
Yeah.
So, with all these organizations, and I will make this statement: this problem's not going to be solved within the Department of Defense or the VA or HHS. I really believe that a lot of the insight and the solutions are going to come from, the private sector. It's going to come from these academic centers of excellence, these other programs that are, I think, really chipping away at this iceberg. And at some point, the Department of Defense, the VA, and HHS are going to have to,
get on board with
with it. Otherwise, they're going to be viewed as negligent and absolutely violate that core ethos of not leaving any more behind.
Before we get going today, is there anything else that I didn't ask that you'd really like to talk about and tell the audience about?
No, I think that one of the, like I said, if I would say another area that we just have to improve on is, and I know this culturally has not been, something that we have done, but it is a missed opportunity. We kind of covered it, but the first sensor that tends to become aware of the change in an operator is their spouse or significant other. And we got to figure out a way to integrate them into this whole kind of monitoring kind of development or con-op that hopefully is starting to come together. It really is about the preservation of the operator and the ability for them to have a quality of life once they leave service. I mean, we've invested millions of dollars in each one of these folks. Why would we not do whatever we can to maintain, retain that investment? And once they've done their duty, and once they made the decision to leave, to ensure that they've got a quality of life. I absolutely, we're obligated to ensure that happens.
Makes sense. Anything or anywhere you want to direct people if they want to get involved with these issues, or they want to learn more about it, or get involved in some of these foundations? Anything they should go and check out?
Yeah, just the ones I just briefly, there's Boulder Crest, which is a great organization. You've got Headstrong Project. You've got Troops First Foundation, Marcus Institute. There's Warriors Path, home base up in Boston, as I mentioned, and then there's a great kind of a hotline. It's Vets for Warriors. It's out of Rutgers University. It's a phone, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week phone line that's manned by veterans to talk to veterans. And so if you're at a point where you're in a bad place, it's a great starting point to give them a call. And they've got connections to a lot of these other organizations we've been talking about. But there are a lot of folks out there that are are in position to help. And so for somebody that may be in a bad place today, you know, you're not alone. We care. And there is hope.
Well, Frank, thank you so much for this interview and stopping by the office today on this beautiful fall morning to talk to us and take some of your time out of your day.
Well, thanks. Hey, I gave my wife the experience of riding the New York subway today, you know, coming from, you know, Midtown Manhattan over to Brooklyn. She's been a great partner in this, but there's not a day that goes by that we don't think about Ryan. At some point, I'm going to see him again. I don't want to disappoint him. Matter of fact, he's here with us today, and he keeps poking me, you know, to make the points that you know come out of my mouth, but I think are really coming from him. You know, he was all about his boys, and if it wasn't for his story, and I think what he did to try to prove that something was wrong with his head, I don't know if we would be where we are. And also the gratitude that I have and respect for people like Kate Rockland, Sydney Mulder, Jen Collins, others that are just on the front end of this fight. And thank you for the opportunity to come in here and talk about this today. You got a great platform here, and you know, whatever help you can give us to get this out, we'd be grateful.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys carrying the torch for all of these guys, not just, you know, your loved ones, but all these other service members who are going through this. And, you know, interview like this, I never know, like, how is it going to impact somebody? But there are like 16-year-old kids that watch these things because they're interested in becoming a Navy SEAL. And if we can plant some of those ideas in their head, like, hey, this is a real issue, 10 years from now, when they start seeing it, they'll know what they're looking at.
Right.
That's my hope anyway.
Well, hey, it's, you know, we still need to train them to be badasses, but we also need to take care of them.
And train them to be smart.
That's right. And they are smart.
Yeah, they are. Well, thank you again, Frank. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we'll see you guys next week. Hey, guys, I want to tell all of you today about a new newsletter that we're launching that encompasses both the Team House podcast, the Eyes On podcast, and the High Side news outlet, which I run with Sean Naylor. The newsletter is going to be once a week. It's going to come into your inbox, and you're going to get the most current podcasts on Eyes On and the Team House and whatever's topical or current on the high side. So it's another way for us to get the information out to you, as social media algorithms are pretty iffy and you never really know what you're going to get. So this is a once a week email. It'll slide into your inbox, and it will have, you know, the greatest hits of that week.
It's really good, man. I'm checking it out.
The website for it is teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. teamhousepodcast.kit.com/join. You go there and you enter into your email list, or you enter your email into the little thing on the website, and you're good to go. And that'll be it. So we really appreciate your support and hope you'll consider signing up.
Where's the link?
The link will also be down in the description if you're looking for it there.
And that's teamhousepodcast.kit, KIT, Kilo India Tango.com/join.